So in this webinar, I just give welcome speech to you and participant for this webinar today. Yeah.
Pak Abdurrahman, masa inkubasi dan lainnya, tentunya kita juga harus cermat dengan situasi peraturan pemerintah yang ada, implikasinya terhadap.
Bisa kita mulai, Pak Abdurrahman?
Pak Abdurrahman menyampaikan
silakan.
ini untuk bisa resource sharing dan lainnya. Saya sih dari pandangan
masuk Pak, kalau dari sana masuk Pak.
Jadi mengusulkan
Oke. Selamat sore para peserta webinar STEMIC Bandung. Good afternoon all participants for STEMIC Bandung webinar series. Today we will hear the same speaker like last Tuesday, Mr. Lambert Yubin, but the moderator for today's webinar is Elsa Frederick. She is a postgraduate student in China, Taipei. Okay, for Elsa, it's now your turn to conduct this webinar, please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, all ladies and gentlemen, the participant for today's international webinar, and also good morning for our guest speaker today, Mr. Lambert Yubin, Head of Analytics and Digital Transformation. Thank you for joining us today. So for today's session, the topic is how mature company can respond to disruption for new entrants. So before we start today's webinar, let's hear the introduction speech from our chairman, Mr. Abdurrahman.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Elsa. Assalamualaikum. How are you? Okay, I participate webinar from and you now is international plan international this account business in telecom balance entrance in digital business has more chance, has more opportunity to be a leader in digital business. But as we know, that mature company has chance to how to make their business bigger and more broad than before. Yeah. So in this webinar, Mr. Lambert will continue his discussion from last week. That last week he explained how new entrants, how strategies for new entrants company to be leader in digital economy. Now he will discuss with us about how mature company to be leader in digital economy too. So I think this is very important for us as new entrant or as a mature company in digital disruption era. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Lambert, to join us in this webinar. This is the second chance. This is the second time for you to join us about how to build smart strategies in digital transformation. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdurrahman, for the welcome speech. Now we will start the session that we've been waiting for, which is the sharing session from our great speaker, Mr. Lambert. And for our speaker, I will introduce a little bit about Mr. Lambert Yubin through his brilliant CV. Mr. Lambert has been at the forefront of digital transformation initiatives, managing programs and projects, helping businesses to initiate and drive disruptive innovations for 8 years now. And he's well known for his mastery of digital technologies like AI, Internet of Things, blockchain, cloud computing, and big data analytics. And he also has multiple certifications from eligible institutions like Harvard Business School, MIT, and Columbia Business School. So without waiting any further, let's welcome our guest speaker, Mr. Lambert Yubin.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks for your kind words. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, wherever you find yourself in the world. And I'm so happy to join you today in our second session about ongoing discussion on disruption. So for those who attended last week, we were talking about how a new entrant can successfully display an existing company that is mature. And as you may expect, mature companies will not sit and allow new entrants to enter and eat up their market share. They will react, they will respond to that. And there is a way of responding to this. And that is what we are going to see in today's webinar. So first, just to define some key words that are on our topic, we have disruption, and we have the concept of new entrants, and then we have the concept of newcombent. So let's look at an example in order to understand some of the keywords that we're going to use throughout this webinar. So I go back to this example of Blockbuster. Blockbuster was a very successful company. They had a movie rental business, and it only took 12 years for a new entrant like Netflix to disrupt them. And they actually filed for bankruptcy in the year 2012. So in this our context, the entrant is Netflix, and the incumbent is Blockbuster. So as you can see, Netflix started very low with almost zero revenue at the time that Blockbuster was very successful. So you can see a peak in their revenue that went up to around $6 billion in 2004. And Netflix, after a series of innovations, actually came up with a disruptive innovation at this stage, and this is where the game changed. And if Blockbuster has gone bankruptcy today, it means that they did not respond to this disruption either early enough, or they kind of neglected this new entrant. As you can see at this point here in 2000, Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix, but they did not. So it just confirms what we understand from the theory of disruption, where the incumbent tends to neglect the entrant at the early stages of disruption, because most entrants usually start by exploring the low end of the market, which is actually the customers that are not very profitable for the incumbent. So from this slide, you retain that when we talk about an entrant, the entrant is the disruptor. And then when we talk about the incumbent is the company that was initially successful, and that company needs to respond. So today we have the mindset of responding to disruption. Unlike last week, where we had the mindset of the entrant, where we wanted to see the strategies to disrupt. So today we are going to look at how you can effectively respond to disruption. And before we proceed, it's always good for us to look at where the term disruption came from. So the first person who coined this word disruption was Professor Clay Christensen of Harvard Business School. And what did he say about disruption? He said disruption actually describes a process whereby a small company with fewer resources is able to successfully challenge established incumbent businesses. Just like we saw in our example, Netflix was a very small company, very few resources. And it only took them 12 years to challenge the established incumbent businesses, including Blockbuster. So specifically as incumbents, that's the existing business, which is mature. As incumbents focus on improving their products and services for their most demanding customers, for the most demanding customers, they end up exceeding the needs of some segments and ignoring the needs of others. So if you consider if you have the mindset of a mature company, most mature companies they spend their time looking for efficiency. So you want to get the most out of very little input. And that means they tend to focus on customers that are very profitable. And when you want to focus on customers that are very profitable, you tend to ignore the customers that are not really profitable for you. Looking at the 80-20 rule, where most companies would tend to focus on 20% of customers that give them 80% of their revenue. So the entrants that prove disruptive begin by successfully targeting those overlooked segments, gaining a foothold by delivering more suitable functionality at a lower price. So as the incumbent is pursuing efficiency at the higher end of the market, the entrant comes at the lower end of the market with an offer that is mostly of lower performance, lower and lower price, and which is just good enough for the customers at the low end of the market. And then what do incumbents do? Like mature companies are the incumbents. So what do they do? So in the case where disruption ends up taking place, what happens is that incumbents, while they are chasing higher profitability in more demanding segments at the higher end of the market, they tend not to respond vigorously to the new entrant that is operating at the low end of the market. And so the entrants then move up market, delivering the performance that incumbents, mainstream customers require, while preserving the advantages that drove their early success. And that is exactly how disruption takes place. So this is the origin of disruption from the person who first coined this word disruption. So after understanding the key words, now we are going to, this is the plan of our webinar today. And if you want to respond to disruptive innovation, you should start by identifying disruptors. First, how can you identify a situation where a company is under disruption, and as early as possible before it's too late. And then the second, we're going to look at how to respond to this disruption. Remember, we have the mindset of the mature company today, unlike last week where we had the mindset of the entrant who was trying to disrupt. So after seeing how to respond to the disruption, then one of the things we'll look at is how to align with the industry's direction, because that's also one of the key concepts, one of the things that a mature company should do when responding to disruption. And then we'll end up by looking at two different strategy development processes that a mature company should adopt in order to sustain that response to disruption. So let's jump into identifying disruptors. So how do you identify how does a mature company identify disruptors? How does it know if there is disruption, a potential disruptor at the low end of the market who may potentially send them out of the market, just like Netflix did? So the first question you need to ask as a mature company is whether you have some customers that suddenly stopped using your product or service. So this is a very important question. And let me illustrate that you as a company, as a mature company, you probably have more than one segment of customers. You have some customers that you consider as very profitable. That is your high end of the market. And then you have some customers that you consider as the least profitable. So maybe due to their purchasing power and the effort that you spend in order to serve them. And then in the middle, you have the mainstream. So those are the customers that are in between the high end and the low end customers. So if you notice that some customers, especially at the low end, so while you are focusing to satisfy your best customers, some customers at the low end of the market, they may get discouraged because your offers are not very sufficient, that your offers do not, your value proposition may not address their needs the way they want. Maybe the value proposition is too much for them. What I mean by too much is maybe they has a lot of performance, meanwhile they needed just the minimum performance at a low price. So in that case, they will look for an alternative. They will tend to look for an alternative. And if you notice that customers have suddenly stopped using your product or service, then you need to investigate that. You need to investigate that because they might be at the low end of the market and they might already be a potential disruptor who has entered and has proposed an alternative offer to them. So that is the first question you need to ask. So remember, your company will be, this is your company's strategy of innovation, because you are going to be striving to satisfy your best customers. So you are going to be improving features and so on. And whilst focusing on these customers, you may lose some focus at the low end of the market. Okay, and so in that case, if you notice that some customers have suddenly stopped using your product or service, it's time you need to talk with them and to understand why they have done so. So that's one way to identify disruptors. Then the second way to identify disruptors, the second question you need to ask is whether you have any new players that are serving customers who lack the money, the skill, or the logistics to buy and use your product or service. So in the first case, the first question that we asked is addressing the type of innovation we call low-end disruptive innovation, which is what we talked about last week's webinar. If you were not present for this webinar, I suggest you go on the YouTube channel and look at and watch that webinar. You will understand the different types of innovation. So the first question helps us to identify low-end disruptive innovations that are taking place at the low end of the market. And then this one is, this question will help you to identify at the same time low-end and mid-end disruptors. Okay, so what is happening here is that if a disruptor, what we saw in in new market disruptive innovation is that if you notice that an incumbent has a product or service that there are some customers that are not currently using it, and you could make that product or service more accessible and cheaper, then it's an opportunity for innovation. So you now as a mature company, you need to watch out for this. You need to watch out to see if someone has modified your offer in order to target the customers that are not currently using, they're not able to use your product or service at this moment. Because that new innovation that they have done will potentially come to your market, potentially come to the high end of your market with time. So this is, as I was explaining, this is the trajectory of the disruptor. And a disruptor really comes at the low end of the market, while you are focusing your effort at the high end of the market. So that's the second question you asked to identify if you are potentially going to be disrupted. Then the third question that you ask is whether another company is modifying your product and service, make it accessible and cheaper for customers that were not initially buying from you. So this is just another question. There are really similar questions, but they are asked in different ways. And this addresses the second question was somewhere between low end and new market disruptive innovation. And now this one is mainly about new market disruptive innovation. So you see that you have this is where your market, this is your market here, where you are maybe you may have low end disruptive innovators in your market, while you're focusing on sustaining innovations as a mature company in order to satisfy your best customers. So someone may modify your service or product and target a completely different market that was not currently buying from you. So what the theory of disruption actually predicts that if they do so very well, they can potentially come to your best customers and then push you out of the market. So this is the question that you need to ask, need to watch out for. You are a mature company today, a company that has gone through the startup stage and is already succeeding. You see that you need to watch out to see, you need to ask yourself if another company is actually modifying your product or service or to make it accessible and cheaper for customers that we are not initially using it. So as an example, think of Netflix. So let's keep our eyes on this example so that you really get the whole picture. So Netflix took the offer at the moment that they entered the market, though they started as a movie rental business also where they had physical stores. But somewhere along the line, what they did is that they came up with, they decided to launch a subscription model. And that subscription model has enabled so many people to access movies all over the world, not only limited to where physical stores are located. So that was like a modification of the offer that Blockbuster was offering. And since Blockbuster did not respond to that, they did not believe that that was going to be a successful strategy. So that is why the story ended up the way it ended. So these are the three questions, just the key questions that you need to keep in mind. There are many other questions, but these are the three main questions that you could ask in order to identify if your business is actually under disruption, and potentially so as to identify the disruptors that are trying to serve customers and that could potentially take over your business. And since we have looked at how to identify the disruptors, it's now time for us to see how to respond to them. So we'll look at how Blockbuster could have avoided this disruption from Netflix. Now, one thing you need to know, the first key message I want to tell you today when it comes to disruption is that you cannot disrupt yourself. You cannot disrupt your business. And let me explain so that you can understand exactly what I mean. So if you are operating today, you have a core business that is operating today and very successful, and then you notice that there is a new entrant. There's an entrant at the low end of the market that is serving your low end market. That is the customers that are the least profitable. They will probably be serving those customers with an offer that is cheaper. So you cannot immediately use the current resources that you have and the current processes that you have in order to attack and respond directly to that new disruptor. So many companies have tried that and they haven't succeeded. What happens is because your current business, your core business is structured to function in a certain way. And you can't just change, it's very difficult to change the processes, especially the processes that people have already been used to. And maybe the philosophy of making money, for example, which is what we call the profit formula. You can't just switch that immediately and start providing a low cost to at the lower market in order to attack the disruptor. Let me show you exactly what you're supposed to do. So in order to I'm getting some noise, please. So few companies have succeeded to respond to disruption, and what they did is that they created a separate business unit. Yes, it's a business unit. So they created a separate business unit with different capabilities in order to respond to disruptive innovation. So you have your core business here. So you need to keep at the back of your mind that you will not use the same resources, you cannot use the same resources and the same processes and the same profit formula that is doing well in the core business in order to disrupt. You need to create a separate business unit. You need to create a separate business unit that has a different kind of philosophy. You're going to have that innovative mindset of exploring potential solutions to the problems that customers have at the low end of the market, just like the entrant. So the new entrant is like a startup, and they are very flexible. So you need a new business unit that is going to be as flexible as that in order to be able to compete with the disruptor at the low end of the market. So you need to understand that in order to succeed in responding to disruption, do not try to disrupt yourself. Don't just use your current capabilities in order to attack the disruptor. You need to create a new business unit. And we'll see that, we'll explain that when we're looking at the capabilities soon. So some examples of companies that did that, you have Microsoft, they did it very successfully. You have SAP, and you have GE, General Electric. So each time they notice disruption, what they did is that they actually created a separate business unit in order that would compete with that disruption. So the example of GE, General Electric, they have one platform which is an industrial Internet of Things platform, and that platform is it came about when they noticed that the Internet of Things was a potential opportunity, when a lot of startups and were already experimenting on the Internet of Things and serving a good number of customers that were at the low end of the market. So what they did is that they decided to adopt the Internet of Things. And when they did so, they actually created a separate business unit that created this platform, which was different from their initial core business. And with time, all these merged to become one business. So what happens is that you are trying to grow the disruptive business while the core business is flattening and dying down. So with time, the core business may disappear. So your objective is that when the core business is disappearing, it should be at the moment where the disruptor has already taken, has already succeeded to maybe drive out the disruptors, and in such a way that you have a completely new business, and that this in which the business has survived the disruption. And talking about the new business unit, why is it so important to separate your disruptive innovation, your response? That's why is it important to create a new business unit? Because the reason is that it turns out that what actually determines what a company can do and what a company cannot do, they are just three things. And those three things are the main capabilities of that company. They are the resources, they are the processes, and the profit formula. So those are the things that determine what you as a business can do and what you cannot do. So if you have already been successful as a mature company, you are already structured in a certain way. There are certain things that you can do. And for example, most mature companies find it very difficult to innovate. They find it very difficult to innovate. Why? Because their resources, their processes, and their profit formula, they are structured in such a way that they are not so open to experimentation. They have already discovered what works, and now it's a matter of how do they execute well on what works. So it's no more about exploring potential, trying to discover more problems or discover customers' real problems, and trying to figure out what is the right strategy in order to create the right products and services that will address those problems. So the mindset actually changes when you are already a mature company. And just for you to understand what we mean by resources, the resources are those things that you can buy and sell. So the examples of resources are technology, the products and services that you have, the cash, the facilities, and the people. So that is an that's what we mean by resources here. And then the second one, capability, is the process. So the processes are those patterns of interaction and coordination and decision making through which your organization transforms input to output. So any mature company already has standard processes. You already have standard processes, and those processes already have maybe some cost, a certain cost structure that is associated with them. And you already have a target gross margin that you expect to have from from selling your products and services. And that target gross margin is what is expected from you by your shareholders and every other person that you're accountable to. And so it's not possible for you to drop the price of your offers in order to compete with disruptors at the low end of the market, because what is expected of you is you cannot do that, because you already have a particular cost structure that constrains you. And that's exactly what we are talking about when we talk about profit formula, because the profit formula is about the criteria that you use in order to prioritize one option from over another. So all those criteria that guide your decisions. Okay, so for the processes, with time, when you have those processes that have already executed for long, then you have they become your culture. So the processes, they kind of become your culture. The interaction with everything, they become your culture, combined with the mindset, the values of your organization. So when they become your culture, it becomes difficult for you to transform them. It becomes difficult for you to change them. And you can't just change them immediately you identify a disruptor in the market. You can't just unite your team and say, oh, yes, now we have a disruptor in the market as from tomorrow or as from next week. all of us are going to develop the program and services that are going to compete with that disruptor in order to avoid a disruption. It is not going to work. You need to separate that. You need to separate and have a different business unit. So the profit formula, the resources and the processes are the key capabilities. They form the key capabilities of the organization, and they actually determine what you can do and what you cannot do. So at a mature company, you need to know what you can do. You are very good at efficiency. You're very good at pursuing high efficiency at the high end of the market. You're very good at executing the processes you already have. But you are not yet good. You are not good at what took you to that stage where you are. What actually took you to that stage you are were your initial stages of experimentation as a startup. You are no more good in that. So you need to get a structure that is good at that, which is actually you need to create a new business unit and equip it with a different profit formula. The profit formula is very important. So when you create that business unit, you don't need to hold them accountable to the same level, the same threshold of gross margin as your core business. You can't do that because there are going to be innovations at that level which are still going to be unpredictable. You will not be able to know that this innovation is going to bring this return on investment, is going to bring this gross margin. At the level of the startup, at the level of at the early stage of that of the disruption, what you need to understand is that there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of you need to admit failure because you are failing in order to learn. And those are the things that the mature business does not tolerate. And the reason why I keep insisting you need to, the main message, you want to take one message out of this webinar. A single message out of this webinar on how to respond to disruption. You need to, the message should be that you have to separate you need to create a new business unit, a separate business unit with separate resources, separate processes, and separate profit formula that will compete with the disruptor that you have identified. And this avoids your new business model, the new business from getting killed by the core business. Yeah, because if you fold it into your core business, the core business is going to hold it accountable to the same level of gross margin threshold or return on investment threshold, which cannot work. And so you end up discovering that the initiatives that were very good for that disruptor, for that disrupting unit that are created to respond to disruption, the ideas that we are supposed to be very good, they end up being labeled as bad ideas because they don't bring the same gross margin as what the core business expects. So you need to separate that. And now there are several options, but let's consider these two options on how you can develop that new business unit. So you can either decide to go organic. That is, you acquire, you get, that is, you buy the technology, the people, that you get all the resources that you need, separate technology, separate people, you get that, plus you get the processes, different separate processes, and the different profit formula, and you get it to grow with time by itself. That is organic. That is one option. Then the second option that you can use in order to acquire these capabilities is you could acquire a disruptor. So some mature companies have succeeded in responding to disruptive innovation by acquiring the companies that they identified as disruptors at the low end of the market. For example, you look at Facebook, you take the example of Facebook. So that Facebook acquired Instagram. So that is an example. So those acquisitions, they help you to gain time. because you end up, you acquire the capabilities that you need without having to go through the process of developing them yourself. So you have these two options. Sometimes speed of execution may be very important, and you notice that it's it's better for you to acquire that same disruptor or a different disruptor that will go head on with the identified disruptor in your market. So in that case, you need to also be very careful, because when you talk about acquisition, you need to consider the synergies that you get when you acquire a new company, because they might come with a kind of culture that may not be very compatible in interacting with your business. But those are the things that you manage in the process of acquisition. And of course, when you acquire them, you need to keep them separate. You have to keep them separate. You can't acquire them and fold them into your core business. So the first thing is you need you need to have a separate business unit. And then there are two ways in which you can create those business units. You either go organic by developing those capabilities by yourself, or you acquire them. For example, you see, Blockbuster had the opportunity to acquire Netflix at the early stages. That was in around 2000, in the year 2000. But they did not do that. Maybe because they did not believe that Netflix was an interesting opportunity. So we have looked at, we have seen how to identify disruptors, because we have the mindset of a mature company. How can you respond to the disruption? So we have looked at how you can first identify those disruptors, and then how you can respond. Yeah, we have looked at how you can respond, and to continue the discussion on how you can respond. So when you are responding, it's not a spontaneous, it's not an event, it's a process. And for you to make it sustainable, you need to align with the industry's direction. You need to always align with the industry direction. And that is what we're going to look at right now. So how do you align with the industry's direction? So here it's about predicting the direction of the industry. And why is it important to predict the direction of industries? When you predict the direction, when you're able to predict the direction of the industry, then you will be able to understand the basis of competition. And when you understand the basis of competition, that's when you can determine the optimal strategy to adopt. So for every new product that has never existed, or for any new industry, at the beginning, the value chain is always very interdependent, such that to succeed, you need to do everything. So what we are seeing here is that we don't yet we still have a value chain that is very linked. That's all the components are still very linked together, because the interfaces between the different components are still very unpredictable. And to understand this better, let's look at the situation of a modular industry, when everything has become so separated. For example, when you have your mobile phone, at the beginning, at the beginning of the industry, what happened is that most players had to manufacture everything. So everything that you see on your phone, on your telephone, had to be manufactured by one person. So they had to manufacture the battery, they had to manufacture all everything you find on the integrated circuit, on the motherboard, the screen, everything. Why did they have to do that? Because there was no one yet specialized in them. They had to discover how to do it. And the interface between those components, like, let me take the example of the screen and maybe the processor. The interface between those two was still very interdependent, meaning that the way that you made the screen was very very much dependent on how the processor was, and it was not yet very possible to define a particular standard for the interface between those two. But today, you find that the industry has become, the product has become very modular. It has become so modular such that players, the companies that are in this industry, they specialize in only one thing. So they specialize in only one thing. You have different people manufacturing the screen. You have different people developing the apps. You have different people, that's the software that runs in the telephones. You have different people specializing in the battery and so on. So it has become so modular. And why is this important? Why is this important? Because your disruptor may choose part of this value chain. So if you are already at this stage, or if the industry is already modular, your disruptor, instead of coming to attack everything, they may come only to this stage here, or to this stage here, or to this stage here. So they may choose the component of this value chain that is the most profitable and disrupt you there. So you need to be able to predict the direction of your industry, and that means you need to know where it is right now and where it's going to be in future, and that's going to help you to determine the basis of competition. At this stage here, at the early stages of the product, the best way to compete is for you to be integrated, for you to do everything. And if mostly at this stage, it's difficult to be disrupted because you need to have a lot of resources in order to produce everything. But as you move ahead, you see that when the interface between the components of your value chain keep on being more predictable, and such that you can separate them and for people to specialize. At this stage, you need to compete by being very fast. And one of the ways to be fast and flexible is for you to specialize in one of these components, one or two of the components. In a few of them, you need to specialize and allow the other ones to other people. And you need to choose the components in which you need to specialize. You need to choose the component that is the most valuable component to the customer. Because at the end of the day, you're looking at the customer. So there are some components on the value chain that you can outsource to someone who has specialized in them. But there are some that you notice that they are very important to the customer, and you don't want to give any chances for any errors or for any low performance at that level. And so as a mature company, you need to know the type of strategy. So when you have already predicted, when you have already understood the direction that your industry is taking, then and understood the basis of competition, then your strategy at the low, if you discover that you are here at the early stages where things are still very interdependent along your value chain, then the best strategy to use is the integrated strategy. And on the other side, the best strategy to use the specialized strategy, as I explained. So now, after when you've understood how to align with the industry's direction, then you as a mature company, there's one concept that is very important that you need to understand, and which is the concept of deliberate and emergence strategy. So when you have separated when you have separated the resources, all the capabilities that you are into the new business unit and the old business unit. So you have your core business, the core business unit. You have the core business unit, and then you have the new business unit that is pursuing the disruption, that is competing with the disruptors. Now, how do you manage the two? How do you manage the two? How can you be able to simultaneous, because at the high level, it's still one company. It's a single company, but it has two separate business units, and those business units you separated them for a reason, and you want to make sure that they don't merge again somewhere and create a lot of problems that you wanted to avoid. So there is that your strategy development process has to be different from the strategy development process of any company that is not under disruption. And that's what we're going to look at today. And what is happening here is that it turns out that you need to manage these two strategies simultaneously. You need to manage the deliberate strategy and the emergent strategy. So let's see what a deliberate strategy is and what an emergent strategy is. So the deliberate strategy is that conscious and thoughtful, organized action that you get. That's the normal strategy that you had as a mature company that you have already had, and it comes from you analyzing industry data, analyzing market data about customer needs, about competition, and so on. So when you analyze all your market, then you have that strategy that you define, which is this is what we are going to do in the short term, the long term, the medium term, and the long term. And this strategy is often implemented top down, because you most usually find that executives go on a strategy, go somewhere, and they think about the direction of the industry of the company, and then they look at and do the analysis, and then they come up with that strategy that the company is going to follow. So that is a deliberate strategy. And it is relevant when you already have a winning strategy that has become clear and effective. And effective execution has become the key to success. So the deliberate strategy is in an environment that is very predictable. It's predictable. So you don't have a lot of changes. You can define a strategy that you are going to implement in the next 1 year. So you are not worried about that things are going to change within that 1 year, because it has become you have had a winning strategy, and you already know that this strategy that you have can be implemented over this particular period of time. So that's the situation where where the deliberate strategy is used, and that's what, as a mature company, what you are currently doing. And then the execution of this strategy, for you to succeed, as you've heard, you need to make that strategy relevant. It needs to make sense to each employee as they view it from their respective context. So it should not be something, since this top down, it should not be like a command from the executive team to every other person in the organization. It should make sense for people doing one or two things, whether somebody is in the marketing or in the HR department, in the finance, but it should make sense. The strategy should make sense to them, and that is what is going to make them to help to make sure that the strategy will be executed. Because after all, the strategies are defined so that they can be executed, and it is the team in the organization that executes the strategy. It's not the executive team that executes. And so now you need to look. Let's see the contrast with the emergence strategy. So you need to manage this deliberate strategy. You need to continue managing this deliberate strategy, because this is the strategy that you have before you have the disruptor, before the disruptor comes to market. And this is the strategy that is helping your core business to succeed. Remember that you are taking resources from your core business. Your core business is profitable today, but you have discovered that if you don't do something, then the disruptor might take over your market. So you are taking the profits that you have from the core business to invest in the new business unit. And so you need to make sure that you continue doing what is giving you the money, the resources that you are getting from the core business, so that you can guarantee to have sustainable investment for the new business unit. So this is what you continue doing. And now the second strategy that you manage is the emergence strategy. And this emergence strategy is about unplanned actions from initiatives that just bubble up from within the organization, typically from people that are not at the executive level, people that do not have that visionary or strategic state of mind. So you have people, those are the people that talk with your customers every time. Those are people that interact with your customers. Those people at the low end of the organization. The managers, and then the individual contributors, all of them, they talk with the customers, and so they get a good number of ideas that you need to listen. If you don't listen to them, then you will not know, you will not be able to answer those 3 questions that identify disruptors. You will not be able to know whether there are customers that have stopped buying from you, and why have they stopped buying from you. So at the time that your core business is pursuing a deliberate strategy, you need to have an emergence strategy. So these are like unplanned actions. You don't plan for them, they just come up. But since you do not plan for them, you don't need to reject them because you didn't plan for them. You need to look at them. And this is happening in the new business unit. We're talking about the new business unit that you created to target the disruption. And this is it is very relevant when the future is hard to read. So for disruptors, if you are responding to disruption, you are still at the early stage of a product or of a new industry that has just, or in fact, a new market that is created with disruptive innovation. For example, you are still at the early stage, and it is hard to read the future. So it's not possible for you to have that clarity on what right strategy you should use in the long run. So this is happening in the new business unit that you created. And since the future is you have to experiment on several ideas in order to discover that strategy that is that's going to be temporarily right. In fact, that's temporarily right, temporarily good for you to target for you to compete with the disruptors. So one need to remember that you don't always have to believe that you already have the right strategy. No, you don't have the right strategy. If you are successful at any point, it means you temporarily have a good strategy. So that's the mindset that you should have. And then the execution, how to execute the emergence strategy. You need to ensure you need to ensure that employees are empowered. You need to ensure that they're empowered to surface and elevate new ideas. So this, you see that this is a different philosophy. These are 2 different philosophies that are adopted respectively by the core business and the new business unit that is going to be competing in the disruptive space. And here, since you are exploring the future, you're trying to discover, you're still at the early stages, you are experimenting and trying to compete you are trying to experiment with a new business model. In most cases, you have to ensure that your employees are empowered to surface and elevate new ideas. So you need to create the environment that is psychologically safe, environment that people believe that it's normal to take risks, it's normal to fail and learn, which is unlike the case of the core business, which is undergoing a deliberate strategy, where we really define what the company is going to do in the next 1, 2, 3 years, and people just need to execute. Okay, it just needs to be executed, and it just needs to be contextualized across the different functions by people and executed. The mindset is really different between the 2. And so you need to be able to manage 2 separate strategies simultaneously. One in the core business and one in the separate business unit that is responding to the disruption. And so we have looked at how to identify the disruptors. We saw 3 questions that you need to ask in order to identify if your company is currently under disruption. And then we have seen how to respond by creating a separate business unit. And then we have looked at why it's important for you to predict the direction in which the industry is taking in order to come up with a good strategy that will be sustainable to compete in the new conditions where you are no more having head-on competitors that are just competing with you for the best customers. You now have you have competitors that are undergoing that are fueling disruptive innovation at maybe at the low end of your market. So we have seen how you can predict that industry direction. And then ended by looking at, we have looked at the type of strategies that you are going to, the type of strategy development process that you should adopt, that you can adopt both at the core business and at the new business unit that is going to compete and for which you have created in order to respond to the disruption. So we have looked at the two different strategy development, different strategies that you need to adopt. So you need to manage the deliberate and the emergent strategies simultaneously, but keeping them very separate. And with this, I think we have come to the end of our discussion. And just to let you know, I help as a digital transformation advisor and trainer. I help businesses and companies that want to identify disruptions. So if you have your company that's currently mature and maybe you don't know whether you are under disruption, maybe you could be neglecting some startups or entrants in your market or in your industry. I can help you to identify any potential disruptions, any potential disruptors. Okay, by helping you to answer those questions by doing the research and analyzing the data that you need in order to answer those questions. And then secondly, to develop and execute the response strategy. So this is what I've been doing for the past years. After identifying the disruption, what I do is that I help I help a lot of companies. I've helped a lot of companies to come up with a response strategy that has helped them to respond to the disruption in such a way that it doesn't kill their current core business that is giving them the resources that they should need in order to attack the disruptors. And then maybe if you need the third thing that I can help is if you need full training on disruption. So then you can contact me as well. That is my contact. And then I also write a lot of articles about digital transformation, about digital technologies, about innovation, and I publish them on my website. And you could also follow me on LinkedIn and so on. So with this, I come to the end of this presentation, and I thank you all for your kind attention. And I'm open to any questions that you may have right now.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing about our topic for today.
You're welcome.
It's really interesting that how innovation is not only helping a company to grow, but also could be the key for their continuity, whether they're successful or going to bankruptcy. So also we'll have a Q&A session right now. It's the end of our session for today. If there's any question, you can put it on the chat room. Any questions?
Elsa, hello Elsa.
Yeah, Pak.
Yeah, before the Q&A question, we'll remember to all participants to entry the attendance chart. Yeah, we have give you attendance form that it will be all participant get the certificate. A question from me, Mr. Lambert.
Okay.
Did you say about value chain?
Sorry, please.
In your presentation, did you say about value chain?
Yes, yes. I mentioned value chain.
Now, my question is, how do you align value chain with the strategy?
Okay. So the value chain is the structure of your industry. So that's the structure of your industry or the structure of your product. And then that value chain, when you know the structure of your value chain, then you will be able to determine if you are operating in a modular, if you are operating in a modular space where the value chain, where the components of the value chain are all separated from each other, or you are working in a kind of value chain that all the components are so interdependent. And so when you answer this question on whether you are whether your value chain is interdependent or modular, then you'll be able to determine which strategy you should pursue. Like when you, if, for example, if you notice that your value chain is still very interdependent, then the good strategy that you should take is the integrated strategy. The integrated strategy is a strategy where you have to do almost everything. You have to do everything along the value chain. So that's a strategy that you need to follow. But if the value chain is already modular, given that all the components of the value chain, all the series of steps of the value chain are already separated from each other, it means the best way for you to, the good strategy that you can use is to specialize, is to choose one component of that value chain and specialize on. Because in your industry, you already have a good number of players that are specialized in other components. So it now comes to how do you choose the right component on which you need to specialize. Globally, knowing your value chain helps you to choose the strategy, whether you need to be integrated or whether you need to be specialized.
Okay. Thank you very much for your answer. And back to Elsa.
Okay, I also have a question for you.
Right.
You mentioning about the new entrants could giving lower price to offer the segments and to took over the segments from the big company. And in your opinion, what's the best strategy for new entrants to took over the segments from big company?
Okay, so thank you for the question. As we saw, as I explained in our last webinar, which was about the strategies that a new entrant can use in order to disrupt a mature company, which is the opposite of what we are doing today. Because today we are looking at how the mature company can respond. So the strategy, your question is how a new entrant can be able to, the strategy they can use in order to win the mature companies. So last time I suggested two strategies, which are the low-end disruptive innovation and the new market disruptive innovation. And I contrasted that with the sustaining innovation. So as a new entrant, do not try to compete with the mature company at the high end of the market where the best customers are found. So do not try to compete with them because they will fight and kill you immediately. So what you can do is that you can go to the low end of the market, look at those customers that are neglected by that mature company, because that mature company is doing everything in order to satisfy those best customers at the high end of the market. And since they cannot do everything well, they will be neglecting those customers at the low end, because they'll be focusing on 20% of the customers that give them 80% of their revenue. And so leaving those customers at the low end of the market is an opportunity for you as an entrant, for you to go to those customers that have been neglected and offer them a service or a product that is similar to that of the mature company, but could have a lower performance. So the product or service could have a lower performance, but most importantly, at a cheaper price, because customers at the low end of the market are very sensitive to the price, and they just need a product or service that is good enough, just good enough, not of high performance like the one that is used to target customers that are the most profitable at the high end of the market. So the low-end disruptive innovation is about focusing on those customers that have been neglected at the low end of the market. Then the second strategy is a new market strategy, where you actually target those who are not able to buy from that mature company, either because the services or products of that mature company are very expensive, or maybe because they are not accessible. That means they are in a particular location which some customers cannot access. Or maybe because you need some skills, you need to get some skills in order to use those products and services. So if you notice that customers cannot access, there are some customers that would have loved to use those products and services, but they are not able to access those products and services because they are expensive, or because they are in a particular geographic location, or because they need to get some skills in order to be able to use those products and services. There's an opportunity for you to simplify that product or service and then offer it to those customers that are unable to buy from that mature company. So when you modify it, with time, your offer will get better and better, and you will be able to move up to the customers in the mainstream. And then as your offer also gets better and better, you'll be able to move up to the high end of the market. But of course, you need to be very good at execution, because as you have seen today, the incumbent, which is the mature company, they will not fold their arms and watch you disrupt the market. Most of them may make the mistake. They're likely going to make the mistake of trying to, or maybe they will just ignore you because they don't believe that they are going to do anything to their market. Or they may try to respond to you using their current structure, without creating a new business unit. And that is going to be the error that we can capitalize on. So those are the two strategies I think you can use as a new entrant in order to displace and establish and mature company from the market.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer. And there's
You're welcome.
also another question from Mr. Richard Agus. To deal with newcomer companies, I agree with the concept of changing values. Then, what about human resources? Is there any possibilities that there are several companies that have human resources that are less productive in their age?
Yes. As we look at the way digital transformation is taking place in the world, you see that the skills that make companies successful today are not the same skills that are needed for them to succeed in the next 10 years or the next 20 years. In the capabilities that we saw in our presentation, we saw that people is an important component of resources. So when we looked at the resource part of the capability, we saw that people are really one of the key resources that the organization needs to have. And so the people, what do we mean when we talk about people? The people are the human resources are those people. And those people are the ones who are going to execute the processes. They're the ones who are going to implement the profit formula. So the people can either help you to respond to disruption, or they can instead come on your way to executing disruption. And so, as I was explaining, for you to successfully respond to disruption, you need to create that separate business unit. And the separate business unit should have separate capabilities. And among those capabilities, we have resources. And the human resources are part of the resources. So you don't take the same human resources that are working in your core business to respond to disruption. You need to have different human resources, different kind of human resources in the new business unit. People with the skills that are necessary, the right skills that are needed in order to develop, to discover the market, to learn from the market, and maybe to discover, to build the business model that you need in order to respond to the disruption. So it needs to be separate. Yeah, if you take the same human resources that already have a certain way of executing their process that has become a culture, it will be hard for them to change the mindset in order to pursue your response strategy to disruption. So the key point when thinking about any resource, not only the human resource, here is that you need to keep it very separate. You want to respond, you want to it won't work.
I'm sorry,
So
Mr. Lambert. I think your connection is.
yes,
Yeah.
sorry. Clear about that. So as I was explaining, you need to keep the capabilities very separate. So when you separate when you have a separate business unit, you need to have different human resources. Yes. Do not respond to disruption by creating a new project and letting the same teams in your core business to start looking at how to attack the new disruptor. They have a different mindset. They have a different culture. They need a complete, your new business unit needs a completely different capability. So that's what I can say about that question.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I think that's the last question for today's session. Thank you so much for our speaker and our audiences and all of the interesting questions. If there's no more questions, I think that's all for today's session. I hope I'll see you again on the next international webinar on 23rd February. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lambert. Thank you so much. Hello, Lambert. Thank you so much for your,
Thank you so much.
You're
welcome.
See you in the next webinar. Yeah. See you in the next webinar. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You're right. Thank you, and see you in the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Stay healthy. Be happy.
Thank you too.
And be proud and productive. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for your kind attention.
Yeah, thank you.
And stay safe as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
All right. You're welcome.